You might not be familiar with Strife, but many who have played it would claim it's an underappreciated classic. A game ahead of its time, a precursor to the first-person shooter of the 21st century, made in the era of the Doom clone. And now, like so many classic shooters, Strife has landed on the Nintendo Switch by way of Nightdive Studios. So I figured that was a good enough reason to take a trip into this unique title to see if it can still resonate with audiences today. What's up everybody, I'm Kirk, and today I'll be taking a look at Strife Veteran Edition for the Switch, to see if this forgotten gem is worth taking on the go. But before all that, please be sure to subscribe to this channel for more videos on the best games of old. Alright, let's begin. Strife was originally developed by Rogue Entertainment and released in 1996 for DOS. It was the last commercial game to use the original Doom engine, also known as id Tech 1. In fact, the developers had a pretty close relationship with id Software, having been courted by the Doom devs to make games with their engine and even having an office next to theirs in Texas. In fact, if you have a chance, look into Rogue's history. It's one forged in mutiny. Seriously. What made Strife unique was its incorporating of RPG elements into the FPS formula. Unlike games like Doom or Duke, where you progress through levels one at a time, Strife actually takes place in an interconnected world. You'll travel to various missions through a central hub world full of NPCs you can talk to, and shops where you can buy new equipment. Strife also featured consequences. You can't just kill people willy-nilly, or else you'll suffer the wrath of the law. If you're thinking to yourself, this sounds an awful lot like Deus Ex. Well, yeah, it does. Strife is seen by many as a precursor to that legendary title. In fact, while playing Strife, you can't help but feel this game is a few steps away from being a true immersive sim. But alas, while Strife does incorporate some player choice, at the end of the day, it's a tried and true first-person shooter, with all the jibs and missiles you'd expect.
The comet struck our planet without warning. We lost our paradise in a single violent stroke.
Strife takes place in a hybrid sci-fi fantasy world which was decimated by the impact of a comet. You play as a nameless mercenary who gets caught up in a war between the powerful Order, made up of mutant religious fanatics, and the Front, made up of freedom fighters trying to free humanity from the Order's grasp.
A movement is born of lifelong strife.
The story of Strife plays out like a pulpy comic book, or maybe a more adult Saturday morning cartoon. Actually, now that I think about it, the game reminds me a lot of an animated heavy metal short, although compared to that, it lacks a substantial amount of memory. You are accompanied, though, through radio, by a sexy female resistance member named Blackbird.
I've been ordered to bring you in. We're talking trust here. Betray me and pay.
Who mainly reiterates the plot points to the player and gives them hints on what to do next. She also throws out a few funny lines here and there.
Why do we have to spend so much time underground? I've seen underground.
Hand-drawn cutscenes are also used to convey the narrative, which don't look too bad. An alright example of mid-90s comic book art, although I wish we didn't have to look at the menu prompt while watching them. Initially, it's a very cut-and-dry plot. You are the ultimate good fighting the ultimate evil. Go forth and blast away our enemies in a heroic hail of gunfire. But then the game throws a curveball at the player, giving them a big choice that drastically affects the game. It's pretty awesome and adds some good replay value to the experience. All in all, it's a fun story and a cut above many of the narratives found in shooters at the time. Visually though, Strife is pretty underwhelming. Bland is the best word to describe it. The texture work can feel monotonous and the level architecture is simplistic, and the enemy sprites, while having a few standouts, are pretty basic looking. Now it might seem unfair to be so critical of an id Tech 1 game from 24 years ago, but keep in mind Strife came out a year after the release of Hexen, which up to that point, in terms of visuals, was the best use of the Doom engine, in my opinion at least. And Strife also came out a few months before the release of Quake, and right around the same time as Duke Nukem 3D. Look, the game simply wasn't killing it on the graphics front. However, that doesn't mean there aren't things to admire here. The character portraits for NPCs look pretty awesome, cleanly drawn with some nice color work, with exception being the portraits for the acolytes. Come on guys, we could have done a little more here. Enemy death animations look pretty good too, a standout being these power suit guys whose driver slumps out of the rig when you down them. Weapon sprites look really good as well, and while I largely found many of the environments to be on the blah side, there are some late game levels that did a decent job of creating some ambiance. In fact, there's some effort here in creating some lighting with faux shadows on display.
We have the sharpest scientific minds and many able bodies, but we lack that one real, problem solver.
There's voice acting in the game, which actually isn't too bad. It's very over the top and video gamey for sure, but compared to other voice acting performances in 1996, like this one.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
Strife could be doing a whole lot worse.
What is it?
What's unfortunate is how compressed and low quality the audio is. It's so bad, in fact, it's kind of hard to tell what some of these characters are saying.
Head over to the old town hall. After the Order bombed it, Maysel had a tunnel built that lets us get in and out without the Acolyte's knowledge.
I'm going to take a wild guess here and say the original audio recordings for Strife have probably been lost over the years, which is likely why these haven't been improved. Also, the music is not my favorite. It's pretty repetitive and sometimes comes off as more of a distraction. Clearly, I thought it was fine enough to use for this edit, but there were a few tracks in this game that I just had to mute because I was getting a little annoyed. Another thing that drove me nuts are the enemy sound effects, specifically the clicking spiders. Be ready to be constantly haunted by the sound of clicking and not know where it's coming from. Finally, Switch specifics. This port is based on the 2014 version produced by Nightdive for the PC. There's not much to report on this front, which is a good thing. The game runs fairly smoothly, although there were the occasional instances of hitching. Unfortunate, but nothing that really hurt the experience. And it controls smoothly, with plenty of options to tweak the controls for those who need them. There's also the option for gyroscopic aiming. When it comes to graphical options though, the game is anemic, only allowing the player to change the FOV. This is a little surprising, as Nightdive games usually feature lots of graphical options, even for their console ports. All in all, I'm not going to say the Switch is the best way to experience Strife, but it is a solid one, and it's a perfectly good option for fans of the game that wouldn't mind playing it portably. In terms of mechanics, Strife largely feels like a reskin of Doom. The movement, the speed, the feel of shooting is nearly identical. A significant difference being the ability to jump and an emphasis on platforming. However, where Strife mainly differentiates itself is with its RPG-inspired structure. The game features a central hub world that branches off into the main missions, separated by a brief loading crossfade which does enough to keep you convinced. Within the hub, you obviously receive your main quests, but can also visit merchants to purchase ammo, weapons, armor, health kits, and the occasional stat upgrade, improving your health, stamina, and accuracy. Enemies also populate this place, although they'll only fire upon you if aggravated, or if they're pissed off by your actions from a previous mission. One quick critique I want to throw out is that I wish the game indicated when the guards are aggravated with you, because you typically don't know until they start shooting. Indeed, this is Doom with an RPG structure, and Strife pulls it off, like chocolate and peanut butter. Well, okay, shooter mechanics and RPG mechanics in general work together really well, as we all know now, but it is fascinating to see that even in this early time of the genre, there were developers already messing around with aspects that would define many later, more modern FPSs. Hexen definitely took a step into this, but Strife takes it one step further. Now, all that being said, Strife may do a great job with the structure and story, but it's when we get into the nitty-gritty of the game that we start to tread on rougher ground. Mission design is where Strife trips up. There are certainly missions that hit that sweet spot of exploration and satisfying combat. One big standout, in fact, is this sprawling castle you assault mid-game, made up of several distinct areas with their own unique challenges. All the while, Resistance fighters battle against the Order. But for the most part, I was a little disappointed by the level design. Some levels just feel too open, too many spots for hit-scanning enemies to have a field day with you. Or they feel convoluted, twisting, turning environments that I kept getting lost in with no clue what to do next.
That brick! Didn't we pass that brick? No.
Worst of all, some of these missions are just kind of boring and feel uninspired. Large, square-like arenas with long, repetitive hallways with very little to break them up visually. There's also several large symmetrical levels, which basically look like the developers built half of it and then just duplicated and flipped it to instantly double it. This really robs the level of a lot of potential character, and it feels rushed. Plus, this design means a lot of identical-looking areas, which can make finding switches and keeping track of what they do a pain in the ass. Something I did appreciate is that Strife does not settle for making its levels key hunts. There's actual objectives to complete here. Sure, a lot of them involve flipping a switch or destroying some mechanical thing. However, one mission has you collecting a volatile mineral that you need to destroy a force field. And when the game does require you to collect a key to progress, it finds unique ways to do it. For example, one mission sees you breaking into a prison to free captured Resistance members. You eventually find a judge whose handprint is needed to open the cells. However, he's not cooperating.
Kill me and you'll never set anyone free. I possess the only pattern key that will unlock the cells.
So, you cut off his hand and use that instead, which is pretty wicked.
Oh, you cut off his hand! And I thought you were a nice guy.
It's objectives like this that give Strife a lot of personality. I also have to shout out the missions that feature hidden alternate routes for players eager to take the stealth approach. But at the end of the day, when we compare Strife's maps to its other Doom engine peers, it definitely is the weakest link. The enemies are fairly underwhelming too. Hit-scanning humanoids whom by themselves aren't a problem, but when in a mob or clear across the map will make short work of you. And smaller mechanical foes like drones and spiders are absolute pests. But I would gladly take these enemy types over the goddamn turrets. They're everywhere in this game. Turn a corner, turret. Enter a large area, turret. Go through a hallway, turret. Their small size and ridiculous range make them a chore to fight, and unless you're using an explosive to kill them, they take a good chunk of ammo to defeat. There's also mechs who are decent to fight as they shoot projectiles, and something about circle strafing and launching rockets makes me feel good. There are several bosses in the game too, who are fun if you enjoy constantly dodging and running away from attacks that will borderline insta-kill you. Oh, and have fun with any of the ones that have NPCs or enemies around them, as they tend to attract your auto-aim. Not the worst bosses I've ever seen, but certainly not the best. Like the game as a whole, Strife's arsenal is mostly familiar with some unique alterations. The dagger, machine gun, and mini missile launcher behave pretty much like the respective fist, chain gun, and rocket launcher from Doom. In fact, the flamethrower felt like a turbocharged version of the plasma gun, but with a lot less range, although the burning animations make it a lot more fun to use. Your starting weapon, besides the dagger, is your crossbow, which holds two types of ammo, electric bolts and poison bolts. It's honestly not a ton of fun to use. It shoots slowly, and with the electric bolts, feels pretty weak against standard enemies, although they do have an edge against the pesky mechanical ones. The poison bolts are what really save this weapon, able to one-shot most human enemies, and its silent nature makes it a key weapon for those trying to play stealthy. The Mauler is very similar to the Super Shotgun, judging from its damage and scattered projectiles. This is a powerful but awkward weapon, mostly because it factors in the reload time of the Super Shotgun, but doesn't show an accompanying animation, so it just ends up feeling stiff and unresponsive. It does have an alternate torpedo mode, which fires a powerful green ball. So powerful, in fact, it will chip some of your health off, best used against the real tough enemies. The grenade launcher is an overpowered death machine that you'll kill yourself with more times than you'll care to admit, as it fires two subsequent grenades. The first grenade you'll get out just fine, but it's the second one you have to watch out for, because, if you're like me, after that first grenade pops, you'll start moving to dodge enemy fire, only for that second grenade to bounce off the wall and blow your ass up. Yeah, you have to be pretty careful with this in close quarters. It begs the question though, do we really need two projectiles coming out of this guy? Couldn't it just have been one grenade with the power of two? That would have felt a lot tighter. Like the crossbow, it has two ammo types, standard grenades and phosphorus grenades. The standard grenades are effective against pretty much everything, lots of booms and splatters. But the phosphorus grenades should be considered weapons of mass destruction. Firing these cause an eruption of flames that will not only consume enemies, but also the area surrounding it. Dancing fire with an insanely wide range of damage, making them just as much of a danger to the player. These things will annihilate just about everything in the game. Have a room full of mechs? Just lob a bunch of these in there, and wait. Now, this is the part where I tell you that the ammo for the grenade launcher is very limited, to keep the game balanced. Ha! Nope. The whole game I was flush with grenades of both types. In fact, between buying and collecting, my explosive weapons were always well stocked, making it pretty easy to bowl through the late game levels. It might be safe to say that the biggest threat in Strife is splash damage. Believe it or not, the BFG of the game is not the phosphorus rounds, but this guy right here, the sigil. A key plot element, the sigil is a weapon you power up throughout the game by collecting 5 parts. There's some cool story elements surrounding it, but it's not enough for me to like it. My big problem is that it's hard to tell if you're actually hitting anything with it. All of its attacks are some form of scattered lightning, which are fantastic to look at but confusing at the same time. Required for many of the game's bosses, it's hard to have a sense for how much damage you're doing. It's too bad because the design and backstory of this thing is pretty cool. It just never felt very effective to me, and the fact that it uses your health as ammo makes it even less attractive. Strife is fun. but very flawed. As a shooter, it's held back by unbalanced weapons, average level and enemy design, and underwhelming presentation. But what elevates it are its RPG and story aspects, a continuous world fleshed out by its cheesy but respectable comic book narrative that provides some good twists and turns. I think if you fancy yourself a connoisseur of the early id Software engines, then Strife is definitely worth checking out. Half the fun is seeing the engine used in such a unique way. The same goes for fans of immersive sims, who will appreciate this as an early stepping stone. Otherwise, I don't think the average shooter fan is going to get a lot out of this. Strife is certainly a game ahead of its time, and remarkable for its innovations. I just wish the moment-to-moment gameplay was more enjoyable. Please be sure to let me know your thoughts on Strife in the comments, and if it's something that interests you. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe, like, and share with your friends. It's a huge help for this channel. In the mood for a classic shooter with RPG elements that happens to be on the Switch, then would you kindly check out my review of BioShock. I post videos weekly, so be sure to ring that bell so you are the first to see them. I'm Kirk, and thank you for watching this video. Stay safe out there.